This video is brought to you by Warby Parker. Order 5 pairs of glasses and try them on for free. This is the box they send you. It contains glasses. Just head to warbyparker.com/biographics to order your free home try-on. More on them in a bit. Today's protagonist is Generalisimo Francisco Franco, who ruled Spain from 1939 to 1975 with the title of Caudillo, leading the longest-running dictatorship in Europe. He is best remembered as the leader of the nationalist faction, the military insurgency which opposed the Republican government in the Spanish Civil War. But how did he rise through the ranks and seize control of a movement that he had not initiated? How did he rule Spain after the war, and how did he orchestrate the transition back to monarchy? Well, we're going to cover these and other aspects of Franco's life in today's episode of Biographics. But before we get started, a disclaimer. An extensive account of Francisco Franco's life implies telling the history of a complex conflict and a whole nation for more than 40 years. So we're going to skip some chunks in today's video. If you think we've missed an important event, please do post your suggestion in the comment below and make sure that you name the protagonist or protagonists of these events, and we might consider them for future videos. Francisco Franco Bahamonde was born on the 4th of December 1892 in the town of El Ferrol in northwestern Spain. He had 2 brothers and 1 sister, born into a family that for generations had served the once glorious Spanish Navy. Sister Pilar described him as very quiet and a serious boy, physically very thin. In his childhood, Francisco had 2 obsessions: his studies and his mother, with whom he had a very tight relationship. Francisco's mother, Maria de Pilar, was an austere and devout woman who imbued Francisco with a deep faith in religion and in the importance of the church in Spanish society. His father was more interested in alcohol and extramarital affairs, a lifestyle which Franco perceived as debauched and he actively avoided throughout his life. In 1898, the once mighty Spanish Empire was reduced to a handful of colonies following the defeat in the Hispano-American War, which cost them Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The remnants of the defeated Spanish fleet returned to El Ferrol, marking a period of mourning for the whole community, and especially for the 6-year-old. This may have instilled in him a desire to restore the glory of the empire. The other effect of the destruction of the fleet was a decline in available spots for the Naval Academy for several years. The Navy would have been Francisco's natural destination, but he had to settle for an army career instead. In 1906, aged 14, Francisco enlisted in the Toledo Army Academy. The new cadet was so small, his voice so shrill, that he quickly became victim of the Academy's bullies. His frame was so frail that the instructors had to modify his training rifle to make it lighter to carry. Francisco made up for his physical shortcomings with determination and hard work, although he did not display particular leadership qualities. He graduated in 1910, modestly placed 251 out of 312 cadets. The Spanish military, it was saturated with officers at that time, and opportunities for career progression were scarce. In 1912, Francisco took the calculated move of volunteering for a post in Spanish Morocco, the last colony, in the hopes of progressing through the army's ranks. His experiences in Africa would be key to shaping his later life. He later declared, "Without Africa, I could not explain who I am." The Kingdom of Spain was engaged in a brutal colonial war against the rebel tribes of the Rif Mountain Range. In this conflict, Lieutenant Franco displayed qualities so far kept hidden: tenacity and physical courage. Lieutenant Franco was in charge of a company of Moroccan colonial troops that were loyal to the Spanish crown. He was able to maintain a ruthless discipline amongst his soldiers, even when under heavy enemy fire. On one occasion, one of his troops refused to eat his rations and threw them at another officer. Franco had him executed by firing squad. It is alleged that he applied this ruthlessness also against civilians, using terror tactics to quell the rebellion. The officers of the Spanish army in Africa at that time were nicknamed Novios de la Muerte, which can be translated as the grooms or boyfriends of Lady Death. This was because of the high casualty rates amongst their ranks. Franco apparently disregarded the fear of death, often leading from the front with almost suicidal attacks against entrenched rebels. In 1917, Franco had already been promoted to major and was ordered back to Spain to break a strike of coal miners in the northern region of Asturias. During his stay in Oviedo, the capital of the region, he got engaged with Carmen Polo. This was despite opposition from her family of wealthy merchants. Back to Morocco, in 1918, on the 28th of June, he was shot in the stomach, an almost certain appointment with Lady Death. While bleeding out on a stretcher, he called out to a doctor, but he was refused treatment. According to the doctor, it would have been futile. Franco then grabbed a rifle and pointed it at the doctor, threatening to shoot him if he was not treated. The medic changed his mind and had him evacuated to a field hospital. Against all odds, he fully recovered. The native troops followed him with blind loyalty after that. In October of 1920, Franco was second in command of the Tercio de Extranjeros, the Spanish Foreign Legion recently founded by Lieutenant Colonel Milan Astre. Milan introduced as such the credo of the Tercio. Death in combat is the greatest honor. You die only once. Death arrives without pain and is not so terrible as it seems. The most horrible thing is to live as a coward. The Tercio became known for its effectiveness, courage, and brutality. One of Franco's soldiers described as such their operations. When it attacked, the Tercio knew no limits to its vengeance. When it left a village, nothing remained but fires and the corpses of men, women, and children. In 1923, Franco became commander of the Tercio, shining for his strategic and administrative ability. On the 23rd of October, he married Carmen in Oviedo, with a representative of King Alfonso XIII present at the wedding. They would have only one daughter, Carmencita, born the following year. After 14 years of service in Morocco, the once mediocre lieutenant had progressed so quickly that he returned to Spain a brigadier general. Aged 33, he was the youngest general in Europe since Napoleon. He had also become something of a celebrity, frequenting elite circles and even starring as himself in the movie La Malcasada of 1926. This curious film, dealing with a real-life divorce case, featured many intellectuals, politicians, and military leaders of the time. Starring alongside Franco can also be seen Old Commander Milan Astre, who would later become nationalist propaganda chief during the Civil War, and even Miguel Primo de Rivera, who was ruling Spain as a military dictator from 1923 with the blessing of the king. Franco's celebrity status and Carmen's connections gave him access to the most elite in Spain, but he did not enjoy their pleasures. He preferred to relish the traditional and austere values that he had learned from his mother, which he imparted to his cadets at the military academy in Zaragoza. But despite his best efforts for a return to tradition, Spanish society was changing around the young general. From the bottom up, Spanish society was shaken by the rise of leftist movements opposing the traditional pillars of the monarchy, the Catholic Church, and the owners of large estates. At the top, Primo de Rivera's dictatorship, it was failing due to his ill-conceived economic policies, resulting in high taxation, unsustainable public debt, and rising inflation. He was forced to resign in January of 1930. In 1931, Alfonso XIII agreed to democratic elections, which saw the victory of the left. In April, the king abdicated. The Spanish Republic, it was founded, and a new constitution was ratified. According to Franco's niece, this was a personal catastrophe for him, as he did not believe in democracy nor in a multi-party system. But the new government was a fragile one, and in November of 1933 it was replaced by a conservative coalition who appointed General Franco as commander-in-chief of the army. The left continued to cause civil unrest, though. In 1934, another massive strike of coal miners in Asturias took place. Franco was tasked with restoring order in the area. He commanded the Tercio to take charge of the strikers. 2,000 protesters were killed or wounded, many more deported to Morocco. But his actions had the unintended consequence of rallying the left-wing parties into a strong coalition called the People's Front. In February of 1936, new elections were convened. This time it was the leftist People's Front who secured a victory. The new government ensured the conservative generals were not close to the seat of power. Franco was dispatched to Tenerife in the Canary Islands, 2,000 kilometers from Madrid. The government kept close tabs on him by wiretapping his phone and checking his mail. In the meantime, unrest and violence were spiraling out of control in the country. The supporters of the leftist government soon gave way to excesses, especially against Catholic institutions. Churches were being burned and priests were murdered. Behind the scenes, a group of generals was plotting a military coup. Franco did not get involved at this stage, coldly calculating the risks involved. The leaders of the plot were two generals, Sanioro and Mola. Mola, the chief planner of the coup, had a scheme to involve Franco in the Bando Nacional, or nationalist forces. The plan involved dispatching a plane from London to the Canaries to then smuggle Franco into Morocco, where he would lead the Tercio to join the insurrection. While the plane was flying to Gran Canaria on the 11th of July, Franco sent an encrypted message to Mola refusing to participate in the coup. But on the 13th, right-wing politician Calvo Sotelo was murdered by the Republican police, which gave to the insurgents the motivation to proceed with their plans at all costs. Franco, he was finally convinced. On July the 19th of 1936, he traveled in civilian disguise to the Moroccan colony. The African army, numbering 30,000, swore loyalty to Franco and to his cause. But how could he ferry such an army all the way to Spain when the navy was loyal to the Republic and was patrolling the Straits of Gibraltar? This is when he secured help from fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. The Italian and German air forces came to help Franco. By organizing 800 flights, they managed to ferry his forces to mainland Spain. The hopes of the insurgents for a quick resolution of the coup did not materialize. What had just started was the long and bloody conflict, the Spanish Civil War. The insurgents also had a leadership problem. Their commander, General Sanuro, had died in a plane crash on the 20th of July, being replaced by the military junta, only formerly led by the elder General Cabanillas. In the meanwhile, Franco had reached Seville and quickly led his army northwards, facing only the resistance of civilians. His African army soon reached Badajoz near the Portuguese border. After reaching the city, Franco embarked in a political cleansing of the area. As witnessed by Portuguese journalist Mario Neves, hundreds of prisoners were rounded up in the local bullfighting ring and executed by firing squad. Franco continued his march towards Madrid, but in September he ordered a diversion to Toledo, south of the capital. In Toledo, a small garrison of nationalists was besieged by the Republican army inside the Alcazar, the castle which housed the very military academy in which young Francisco had graduated. Franco's army defeated the Republicans, but he only joined them the following day, the 27th of September, in full view of the news cameras. He had realized that this was more of a PR event than a simple military victory. Toledo was not only home to the military academy, it was also the religious capital of Spain. By appearing as the liberator of Toledo, Franco had portrayed himself as the defender of Spanish traditional institutions. One traditional institution that you don't want to defend is the prices at boutique eyewear shops. Not a great thing, but that was a great transition into today's sponsor, Warby Parker, who I want to tell you a bit about right now. In fact, I actually want your input because I just got my box of free try-on from Warby Parker. I got 5 pairs of glasses to try on for 5 days. Obviously, they're not to my prescription yet, but I'm going to rotate them through this ad and I would love your feedback. I will probably take it to heart. Use the comments below. Okay, so Pair 1, what you do is you go online and you take a quick quiz and you get some recommendations to your face and your style. Pair 2, glasses start at just $95, including prescription lenses, which is a super competitive price, and you also get all the good stuff like anti-glare and anti-scratch. Pair 3, you can even try them on virtually before you get the box if you got an iPhone 10, so that's handy. Pair 4, all of these glasses that I'm trying on today, they look and feel great. You know, I'm not a style expert, so let me know what you think below, but you can tell that these are great glasses. I've worn glasses for a very long time. Finally, pair 5, but yes, Warby Parker. Order 5 pairs of glasses and try them on for 5 days, no obligation to buy if you don't want to. Ships free, just head to warbyparker.com/biographics in order to try your free home try-on. And let's get back to today's video. On the same evening, Francisco traveled to the city of Cáceres. Here, General Milan Astre and General Iago announced that now the whole nationalist army was under the sole command of General Franco. So far, Francisco had been leading only the African army in the south, while General Mola was in command in the north. All of the generals, except for the old Cabanillas, thought that a unified leadership would improve their war efforts. Franco was one of the candidates, but he was not sure about taking the mantle. It was thanks to the scheming of his own brother, Nicolas, that he eventually accepted. Nicolas first pressured Yagüe into convincing Francisco to lead all armies. Yagüe issued a vague threat to Franco. If he didn't accept the role, the junta would appoint somebody else. Nicolas also orchestrated a meeting of 8 leading generals, including Franco, in Salamanca on the 28th of September 1936. The purpose of the meeting was to decide whether to concentrate on one single person, both military and political leadership of the Spanish state during the Civil War. Except for 2 generals, everybody voted for Franco to be the leader of the Spanish state, a term which indicated the nationalist-controlled territory. Franco now had become the Generalisimo of all armed forces and head of the government. He took on the title of Caudillo, an ancient style for leader. In theory, he only had a mandate for the duration of the war, but Nicholas cleverly redacted the official bulletin bearing this decision so that this time limitation was omitted. The Franco brothers had outsmarted the other generals, a real coup within a coup, which ensured total power for life to the once reluctant insurgent. By October of 1936, nationalist forces were in control of roughly 1/3 of Spanish territory, mainly in the west and north of the country. But Madrid, it was still out of Franco's reach despite intensive air and artillery bombings. At this time, the Republican government secured support from Stalin. Now every side of the conflict could rely on help from powerful dictatorships. This war would not spare civilians. It was a total war in which many of the horrific tactics of World War II would be tested. Atrocities were perpetrated on a massive scale on both sides. Franco and the other generals enacted a policy of purging captured cities, following the example of Badajoz. The Republicans were also active in executing members of the clergy, national prisoners, nationalist sympathizers, and even themselves, as a result of infighting among disparate factions, most notably in Catalonia. It is estimated that by the end of the war, the nationalists had executed 75,000 people compared to 55,000 murdered by the Republicans. In February 1937, Franco attempted to take Madrid by frontal assault in the Battle of Jarama River, but he was stopped by the international brigades of foreign volunteers. It is interesting to note that 5,000 Germans and 3,000 Italians fought against Franco, joining the international brigades in support of the Republic. These brigades were 60,000 strong at their peak. In March, Franco approached the capital from the northeast, capturing Guadalajara first. An Italian corps took the city and then moved quickly to Madrid, but were repelled by a Republican and Soviet tank counterattack. Operations progressed for the nationalists in the north. In August 1937, they captured the northern stronghold of Santander with help from Italian Regular Army and Blackshirts. This helped consolidate their territories in the north. In the meantime, the German Condor Legion and the Fascist Air Force had been perpetrating the first large carpet bombings of civilian targets over Durango, Barcelona, Madrid, and most notably Guernica on the 26th of April 1937. But all in all, despite decisive support from his allies, Franco's progress was slow. German leadership was frustrated by this and suspected it was a calculated move on his side. Franco's strategy was to firmly consolidate his own political power before advancing on new territories. The situation for the Republicans became dire in the second half of 1938. In July, they engaged the nationalists in a protracted battle on the river Ebro in the northeast. It lasted 113 days and claimed more than 13,000 casualties on both sides. The nationalists, 600,000 strong, could take the hit, but the Republicans less so. In September of 1938, the international brigades withdrew from Spain, while Mussolini sent even more aircraft and artillery to Franco. On the 26th of January 1939, Barcelona fell to the nationalists. The president of the Republic, Manuel Azaña, fled to France. On the 27th of February, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was the first European democratic leader to recognize Franco's government as legitimate. On the same day, Azaña resigned, and by the 1st of April, all Republican forces had capitulated. That was the end of the war. 500,000 people had died, 2% of the total Spanish population. But the death toll wasn't going to stop there. As sole ruler, dictator, or caudillo of the Spanish state, Francisco Franco could not tolerate dissent. After the war had ended, he continued his policy of purging his country of enemies of his regime via executions ruled by military tribunals. Sources differ, but it is alleged that between 30,000 and 200,000 dissidents were executed by Franco's regime. Following the beginning of World War II in Europe, there was a debate as to whether Spain should join the Axis powers. On the 23rd of October 1940, Franco and Hitler met in southern France. Franco owed much to the Germans, but during that meeting he did not commit to active participation in the war. The decision was considered a wise one and defended by Francoist supporters over time. The Spanish military and industrial capabilities had been exhausted by the Civil War, and they were not in shape for fighting another conflict. However, a member of von Ribbentrop's staff, interviewed by the BBC, reported that there had been a previous meeting in Berlin. Ribbentrop had met with Franco's Foreign Affairs Minister Serrano Suñer. The minister proposed to join the Axis in exchange for a large chunk of North African territory to rebuild the Spanish Empire, but at that time the Germans had not been impressed by the offer. At that meeting in France, again Franco offered his participation in the war in exchange for all of French Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Hitler could not accept these demands, and the negotiations did did not progress. The Führer, he was furious. This is when he famously said that he'd rather have 4 teeth pulled out than another talk with Franco. Later in the war, Franco was astute enough to maintain an equidistant neutrality with both Axis and Allied powers. For example, on the one hand, he allowed Allied pilots downed over Spanish territory to rejoin their countries, and he never made a move on Gibraltar. On the other hand, he allowed Italian Navy frogmen to launch raids on Gibraltar from Spanish ports. By 1941, he was maintaining good trade relations with the US and the UK, but in that summer, he allowed a contingent of 47,000 volunteers to join Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. This contingent, known as La Division Azul, or Blue Division, was recalled in October of 1943 when it was clear that the war on the Eastern Front was a lost cause for the Axis powers. This marked Franco's opportunistic shift towards the Allies in the latter part of the war. After the war, Franco came under considerable pressure to restore the monarchy. In 1947, Franco announced a referendum to let the Spanish people decide. The vote confirmed a preference for the monarchy. However, the ever-astute Franco, while accepting the decision, declared himself as a lifetime regent, with the privilege of appointing a further regent or a new king before his death. Following the death of Alfonso XIII in 1941, the natural heir to the throne was his third son, Don Juan of Bourbon, Count of Barcelona. Don Juan's older brothers had both renounced their right to the throne. Franco, however, was under pressure from 2 components of his power base, the Falangist and the Carlist movements. The Falangists were anti-monarchic, while the Carlists supported another branch of the Bourbons. Franco managed to placate both sides by selecting as future king the son of Don Juan, named Juan Carlos. Reluctantly, Don Juan agreed, and in 1949, the 10-year-old Juan Carlos traveled to Madrid to begin his studies and training as future monarch. While planning for succession, Franco had to think about rebuilding his country, which was weakened by the war, and it was internationally isolated. The international community saw suspicion in his regime, a remnant of fascist dictatorships from before the war. In fact, Franco's regime did offer sanctuary to many former fascists and Nazis, a prime example being SS commando Otto Skorzeny, who managed a thriving business in Madrid. Franco embarked on a project to reconcile the opposing factions of the Civil War, the Valley of the Fallen. This is a monumental shrine built over 20 years not far from Madrid. It is topped by a gigantic cross taller than the Eiffel Tower, and it houses the remnants of 50,000 nationalists and Republican soldiers. Franco's intention was to commemorate the fallen, heal the rift between enemies, and lay a promise not to engage in further civil conflict. The intention, it was good, although some sources claim that it was built thanks to forced labor of Republican prisoners. Looking externally, Franco sought to re-establish ties with the West. His strong anti-communism stance made him especially popular with the United States, and they backed Spain's entry into the United Nations in 1950. The relationship with the US was cemented in 1953. Franco and President Eisenhower signed an agreement that enabled the United States to establish 4 military bases in Spain. In return, Spain was allowed to join NATO. In the same year, Franco got recognition by the smallest, but by no means the most powerless state in the world, the Vatican. Pope Pius XII granted Franco the right to appoint Spanish bishops from a list of several candidates proposed by the Holy See. In 1956, Morocco gained independence after being a French protectorate. The Moroccan government demanded authority over the Sidi Ifni territory, one of the last remnants of Spanish possessions in North Africa. Franco denied this concession, as ever willing to preserve at least a slice of the empire. Morocco reacted by creating a Moroccan Liberation Army, which engaged the Spanish garrison in a series of skirmishes, until the Generalisimo ordered the intervention of paratroopers from the motherland. The war, known as the Spanish Forgotten War, dragged on into 1958, with even the French Army and Air Force joining Franco in February. By April, the Moroccans had been defeated, but Spain was pressured by the UN and the US to hand back the region of Tafaya. Spain retained control of Sidi Ifni until 1969, when it returned the former colony to Morocco following a UN resolution. In 1963, Franco had launched a program to soften his totalitarian regime in a bid to further improve relationships with the West, and in particular the US. He terminated the activities of military tribunals and had them replaced with civilian courts. He also shut down the special courts created to trial communists and Freemasons. Other reforms included laws supporting a partial freedom of the press and freedom of worship. Until then, the regime had actively suppressed the activities of all opposition, left-wing parties, trade unions, and regional separatists who were very vocal, especially in the Basque Country and Catalonia. Franco's reforms and overtures to the West had succeeded in stabilizing the country and the economy. Repression of dissenters, it was toned down, but the Generalisimo still maintained a tough stance against separatism. In August of 1965, President Johnson asked for Spain's participation in the Vietnam War. The caudillo rejected the invitation, logically wary of engaging in guerrilla warfare in a faraway jungle, but he did order for a team of field medics to join the war. Meanwhile, Franco, his advisor Luis Carrero Blanco, and Prince Juan Carlos were planning the succession. The plan was to formally reveal the Bourbon prince as future king in January of 1969, but this was delayed due to a series of terrorist attacks from the ETA, the Basque separatists. Finally, in July, Franco formally announced that Juan Carlos of Bourbon would succeed him as head of state and king of Spain. In a televised ceremony, the prince swore an oath of loyalty to the Caudillo and the nationalist movement. By 1973, Franco was 81 and not able to handle the day-to-day administration of his government. He appointed Carrero Blanco as prime minister, maintaining an active role in some foreign policy matters. Carrero Blanco's office was short-lived. On the 20th of December, his car was blown up by the ETA in an explosion so violent that the car flew over a church and landed on a second-floor terrace. A macabre joke started to circulate in Spain, which roughly translates to "up with Spain, up with Franco, even higher than Carrero Blanco." The subsequent crackdown on the ETA led to 5 terrorists being sentenced to death and executed in September of 1975. These death penalties caused massive demonstrations in Madrid, Lisbon, and the Basque city of San Sebastian, as well as international condemnation. Franco had firmly backed these and future executions. The dissent, the demonstrations, even the jokes, all these were clear signs that times had definitely changed since the totalitarian days of the 1940s and 50s. The regime, regardless of the caudillo's age, it was nearing its end. Generalissimo Francisco Franco Bahamonde had been a reluctant leader who had gained control on the back of his brother's schemes. He had been nostalgic of the empire, ready to bargain his country's entry into World War II to regain North Africa. He had been the ruthless caudillo who did not tolerate opposition. And finally, he had been the astute politician who had sought to bring stability to a divided nation. Francisco Franco died on the 20th of November 1975 of natural causes. His last words were reported as, "I ask pardon of all my enemies, as I pardon with all my heart all those who declared themselves my enemy, although I did not consider them to be so." In his last conversation with Prime Minister Navarro, he asked for the Spanish people to rally around their new king, Juan Carlos, and to keep the lands of Spain united. The Spanish did give their support to Juan Carlos, who successfully led the transition to a full democracy. I'm aware that Francisco Franco and the Civil War remain a divisive topic to this day in Spain, so before we end things today, I'll ask you to kindly not turn the comments section into a rhetoric battle. Why don't you use the comments instead to suggest another character from the Civil War, maybe on the Republican side? And that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Please do also check out our new sister channel, Geographics, that's linked to below. And as always, thank you for watching.